My name's Jim Willmont. I'm Chair of Property Rights Australia. We've been around for about 20 years, started in 2003. We're a bunch of landowners. We've got people on our board that own big stations, and we've got people in our membership that own just a block of flats in town. So we were established in 2003 after Premier Beattie had to chop out a bunch of landholders out at just north of Charleville. When they were given clearing maps under the Vegetation Management Act that Beattie brought in with Howard, and the maps were wrong. The cockies went and cleared vegetation to feed their starving stock, so Beattie's and his henchmen took those landholders to court. And then we took Beattie to court. And so we won 11 out of the 14 cases. So that's how we were established. So we're all about protecting your property rights. It's all volunteer. We've got members all over Australia, about 500, so we're not a very big organisation, but we're quite active. We've got a very active Facebook site, Property Rights Australia, and a very good website. We've got a fighting fund, so we put all the money that we get from donations goes into a fighting fund that helps groups like Katie's, like the Beginning Action Group. There's 116 groups like Katie's spread down the east coast of Australia, and there is more and more developed to fight back against renewables. I'm just timing myself today. I don't want to go overboard, but that's what property rights is. So we stand up to government and we hold them to account. So what's the framework? Where did all this renewable stuff come from? So back in 1994, the United Nations put through the Convention on Climate Change, and that was all about stabilising greenhouse gas concentration. So what I'm doing here, I'm just giving you the overall framework of how this came to our front door today. In 2005, the Kyoto Protocol was operationalised, and that limited greenhouse gas emissions in line with the green targets. That's when we, as landowners, I know myself and there'd be some other landholders here, that's where all the coding and the colours came on vegetation maps on your property, what you can clear, what you can and can't clear. It looks like a bowl, it looks like a rainbow at the moment. There's so many different colours and it constantly changes. You've got reef regulations also on that. So actually a lot of Australian farmers helped. We were the reason why Australia as a nation achieved those key targets under the Kyoto Agreement, because we locked up our land. That land where we can't use anymore, but we need to pay rates on. And then there's quite recently the 2015 Paris Climate Change Agreement. And as you know, Australia signed up, and all the countries that signed up to it, we agreed to set nationally determined contributions, or NDCs. And what that is, you might have heard Katie's mate Albanese said, 43%, we're going to go for emissions below 43% below 2005 levels by 2030, and 100% emissions reduction by 2050. So that's where those figures come from our commitment. And then you would have heard, because they think through the National Energy Network, they call it a market, but it's really like a physical network. We're going to go to 82% power generation, electrical power generation by 2030, and 100% renewable power generation by 2050. And that is why you are seeing this massive rollout of renewables in Australia. So the national energy market, when I talk about that, is a physical power grid, and it takes in Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, South Australia and Tasmania. It doesn't take in Northern Territory, it's separate, and doesn't take in Western Australia. They've got a separate grid. And so to achieve that 82% by 2030, when you think about it, it's only 6 years away. We've got to go 82%. And Queensland government, they've got different targets to help. I think it's 50% renewable targets by 2050, by 2030. 2032 is 70%, 80% by 2035. But at a national level, that's where we're on. So Albanese, to make that happen, to get 82% by 2030, he gave $20 billion to rewire the nation, and that's where all this money for transmission lines comes from. That's where they're building all these transmission lines, giving money to government corporations like Powerlink, like EnergyCo, like AusNet. They're all called different things in each of the different states, but basically they're all state-owned corporations. And we've got this thing called the Capacity Investment Scheme, where overseas companies, even some of our own renewable companies in Australia, it's like they're given we underwrite their revenue, so it takes away the risk of them building things like forest wind, building that big solar factory out near Cadiz, because they're guaranteed a revenue of return. So Bowen won't tell us how much money he's putting into that, but we guess it's around 56 billion. Okay, and there's a heap more other, I guess, subsidies that are happening at the moment, but I'm not going to go into that at this time. So Albanese government, there's this thing called, there's this organisation called the Australian Energy Marketing Operator. It's made up of industry bodies, a few bureaucrats, a few renewable developers, energy consultants, and they've developed like an integrated system plan. And you can search this on Google. It's called the Integrated System Plan. It's produced every 2 years. So we're still operating off 2022, but there's a draft one out, 2024. Just Google it. And what that is like the comprehensive roadmap, in their own words, of how we're going to achieve 100% renewable energy by 2050. So all the power that we use, the electricity that we use at home, industry, driving cars, transport, agriculture, will all be powered by electricity. But this is just in the actual national energy grid. It's a very interesting document. You've got to really drill down to it. So in that, there's a number of scenarios. How are we actually going to achieve 100% renewable energy by 2050? How are we going to get there? So obviously they model it. There's a lot of science is modelled these days, the bulk of it. So there's different scenarios. And the most likely scenario that they say that will help them get there and they're working towards is this thing called the step change scenario. Now, I want you to remember these words, the step change scenario. So we've got basically 2.5 decades or a bit over before we reach 2050, yeah? So under the step change scenario, they said renewable expansion is going to triple this decade, 2020 to 2030. There's going to be a tripling, so that's the first step. So we have only just seen the start of renewable energy development and its footprint in Queensland and across the East Coast as we know it. So the next decade after that, it's going to double that again. And leading up to 2050, it's going to double that again. So you can see a massive expansion in the geographic footprint of industrialised renewables in the southeast coast of Australia. And that's modelled, so it'll be a lot more than that, and that's what they even talk about that. So you also would have heard the government, Albanese, Bowen, Miles, who's that other clown, De Brenny, they talk about hydrogen and how all our heavy transport's we're going to shift to hydrogen, and that's going to be the new fuel, and we're going to export hydrogen. They're actually thinking about wrapping hydrogen as a gas and encapsulating it in the natural gas that we have pipelines for out of the Surat Basin and go to Gladstone, because you can do that. 15% hydrogen can be actually put into natural gas and they can transport it. That's what's going to happen. That's what they're going to do. So they want to have a big hydrogen export industry, because we've already signed contracts with Germany and Japan to take hydrogen out of Gladstone, potentially Bundaberg. And you might say, oh, how do you know this, Jim? And I'll show you. So we're going to be, when they say we're an economic renewable powerhouse, that's one of the things, we're going to be a massive exporter of hydrogen. So to do that, they also talk about this green energy export scenario. So they're thinking it's most likely the top one with a bit of the bottom one. And so it's 34 times the amount of renewables that we see at the end of this decade. So it is an enormous footprint, because hydrogen takes so much energy to make and break down. It takes massive amounts. Remember, it's all got to be with wind and solar. That's what's going to power it. So I'll just show you what that looks like. So this is a map here, and this is straight out of the ISP, the Integrated System Plan. I don't make this stuff up. I'm using the government's own maps here. On the left-hand side, you will see the current decade we're in now. This is under the step change scenario. You remember? The step up, the triple, double, double. And so solar is yellow, wind is green, and you can see this decade, the next decade, and the last decade, how the geographic expansion of solar and wind, and I'm talking industrial solar and wind, is going to expand under that step change scenario. So you can see by the end of 2050, we're going to have massive areas covered in industrial renewables. But remember, it's a combination of this scenario and the hydrogen superpower, the green export scenario, same thing. So you can see the difference there. So you've got this decade, the next decade, and 2050. So you can see the impact that is going to have, the geographic footprint industrialised renewables is going to have on the eastern seaboard of Australia. And so there's obviously going to be some fair impacts out of that, isn't it? Rural amenity, agricultural production, a whole host of accumulative effects, environmental impacts, all the stuff that we see that will be experienced here at the Forest Wind project, Katie's project out there. So the scale and rate of change. So Australia we're currently installing industrialised renewable energy faster than any time in our history. It is the new gold rush because all those big companies overseas see Australia as fertile ground. They've built out a lot of Europe, Canada, still going hard in the USA, and here we are, we've got all those subsidies here. We guarantee them 50% of income when they roll out. There's there's very few environmental regulations to stop them. That's why we're rolling out the red carpet. That's why they're turning up. That's why there's heaps of them out there now as we speak, knocking on landholders' doors, trying to host, either buy their properties or lease components of their properties. So it's the new gold rush. You might hear VRE, and people say, what's VRE? It's variable renewable energy, and this is important because when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine, you don't get any renewable energy. So you have these big peaks when in the middle of the day in summer where, solar's operating at its best, and then at night, nothing. The same with wind. Wind turbines need 6 metres a second. That's a sweet spot. Wind goes too high, they switch off. No wind, they don't turn. So you get these big peaks and troughs. Well, with coal-fired power generation and that, you just have it steady. Big synchronous turbines that boom, 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 boom. Where variable renewable energy is like this. And I'll explain some of the issues with that. The proposed energy grid look like. So if we get to 2050, what's it going to look like? We're going to have large-scale wind complexes. I hate calling them farms, but just like forest wind, okay? And so the thing about wind turbines is the thing about capacity factor. They might say, oh, this big turbine factory out here is going to, produce enough power to power 20,000 homes or 120,000 homes. This can produce, say, just for argument's sake, it's easy calculation, 100 megawatts. Okay, but when you look at a capacity factor, because the wind doesn't blow all the time, does it? So it's averaged out. Okay, it's about 30 to 33%. So really it's only producing, if it was designed to produce 100 megawatts, it's only ever going to produce 30 to 33. So you've got to triple that to get that 100 megawatts. And that's the problem with wind. It's a very weak energy. See, we're moving away from dense energy to very weak diffuse energy. That's why there's such an overbuild. That's why those other scenarios I showed you, you've got to have such a big geographic footprint to be able to produce enough power. Offshore wind produces about 50 to 55%, so it's a little bit better, but still nothing like baseload power needed. So solar is about a roughly 25% capacity. It varies. So you've got to quadruple that to get to the power of the nameplate, they're saying, because they always come out and say, oh yeah, no, it's going to do like the Mount Emerald wind farm. It's been in for a number of years now. It was designed to power 70,000 houses out the coast, off the back of Cairns, and people said, oh, this is going to be great. I've got a few my greenie mates that thought it was a great idea. But you do the research and you do what actually is this project Emerald Wind Farm producing. There's 56 days in the year where it produces nothing. Zero. It's got a capacity factor of 26%. So let's work that out. If it was supposed to produce enough power to 70,000 homes, you see how they trick you? Always think about the capacity factor. Coal's got a rough capacity factor, coal-fired power generation around 67, 70%. It varies. Nuclear can go 91% up to 96%, for argument's sake. And then they've got this thing called distributed solar. So we're going to have a lot of that. And that's made up of rooftop solar and wall batteries, and then we're all going to be driving EVs. And remember, this is critical because all this stuff you see out here, all these major renewable projects, the industrialised renewable projects, we will not see much of that power domestically. It won't come to us, it's going to companies. Offshore, here, they'll take all that under things called power purchasing agreements. What Albanese didn't tell you in their costing, there's $360 billion that have got to come from us, because we'll be getting most of our power from solar on our roofs, our wall batteries, and from our EVs, and a lot of that will be behind the meter stuff. And that's called consumer energy resources. It's in the ISP. They come out and say it. That's where the bulk of domestic power will come from. Just want you to set that, and that's $360 billion that they haven't accounted. Because remember, Bowen, they love getting up and saying, oh, it's so cheap. This is such cheap, this power. Guess what? Because we're going to pay for the bulk of our own power before. It's going to cost us around $40,000 to $50,000 to deck out our houses with solar, wall batteries, and have an EV that's, there's things called passive community energy resources and coordinator, where we don't have a choice behind the meter stuff. They'll be able to take electricity out of your car, out of your roof, and out of your battery without your permission. So we've got base power to use. And you can imagine, that's right, you can imagine the augmentation in the lines and that in metro areas to carry all that varying power from day to day. It's a massive expense that they haven't included going forward, because we're paying for it. Firming capacity. Firming capacity is, remember when I talk variable renewable energy goes, it has its peaks and its troughs. When those troughs, it needs backup power. We need to firm that power up when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine. And so we need these things called pumped hydro, and they go from 8 hours to 24 hours. They use renewable energy during the day from forest wind here and from those solar factories out near Katie to pump the water up to a top reservoir and then let it go at night through the turbines, and that's what generates that power. But it only lasts 24 hours. Okay, but that's what pumped hydros enable more industrial scale renewables to come. If we have that big pumped hydro coming in Barumba, we will get a heap more industrial renewables because they firm that fluctuation out. That's why they've run the big umbilical cord, the 500 kV line out through Kilkeven, because guess what? There's heaps of companies talking to landholders off that line because they're going to link into that with industrial solar and wind. It's happening now. So we're going to have pumped hydros. There's another big one at Yungala, and there's big Snowy Point 2 in New South Wales. How's that going? You know, we're talking big money here. Snowy Point 2 could be, started off $2.5 billion, now $12 billion, could go all the way to $29 billion. Barumba 14.2 plus transmission of about 800 or 900 million. It's going to be more than that. Yungala, they don't really know how much it's going to cost. So that's big, massive money. This is why our power prices are never going to go down. They're only going to keep going like this. So what's that going to do to our lifestyles, and what's it going to do to our manufacturing, our hospitals and our service delivery? Then you've got these things called battery energy storage systems. There's these big lithium batteries that are made in China. They've got a computer head at the front of them that regulated, and they're put near all these wind and solar. There's going to be battery energy storage systems within the Forest Wind project. I don't know, there might be 3 or 4, Des might know how many. And so they're full of lithium containers, 40-foot containers are full of lithium batteries, and they're all made in China, yeah? They all burn, some of them burn, that's right. So they have it's kind of short term, 2 to 4 hours. They last 10, 13 years, some only last 5 years. And so the thing with that, and they think, oh, your batteries, we will never have enough storage capability with a whole 100% renewable policy. And remember, this is what Albanese wants Their policy, and let's think about this, is 100% renewables. They want our whole grid to run on 100% renewables, where the coalition wants an optimum renewables. They understand that we need baseload power come from somewhere else, bar renewables, so they just want the optimum amount. We will never have enough battery power, and that's the problem with renewables. You know, it's all right to have 24 hours out of pumped hydro or 2 to 4 hours out of a battery, but what happens if we have a big wind drought? Germany last year came out of a wind drought of 38 days, where all their wind turbines are only running 10%. What happens on a day like this if we had a week like this, or we have an east coast low or a cyclone come down and wipe out forest winds? You know, we do get cyclones in Gympie still, don't we? So these are some of the issues that they really don't tell you about. And they have gas-fired generation. They will have that. They've talked about that in the EMO integrated system plan. They're called peakers, gas peakers, and they'll try and follow that load around to give us some baseload power from gas. But guess what? We aren't allowed to use gas much anymore, are we? In Victoria, you can't build a house with gas in it anymore. They're restricting the use of gas because it's got emissions, even though it's 30% less than coal. So we'll also have transmission line. That government doesn't really know how much transmission lines we'll need, but it's between 10,000 and 26,000 kilometres. And that's it from the top of Australia, northern Queensland, right down to across Tasmania through the Moranis line into Tasmania from Victoria. So that's the main trunk line that they're talking about. Those little, the blue and the yellow is just an indication of some of the wind and solar, but there's a lot more than that. So that's the main trunk lines that they are building. And there's going to be a heap of auxiliary lines. This is straight out of the integrated system plan. Heaps of auxiliary lines that are going to come from this. So this is where it's going to cost $1.3 trillion for transmission lines. And you know, when you pay your bill, 40% of that electricity bill is made up of transmission costs. Do you think your power bills are going to go down? They are only going to go like this, mate. They will never go down. And this is why the amount of investment that they've got to put in and maintenance. They have these things called renewable energy zones. There's 47 of them now across Australia, so it really covers the whole of the national energy grid. We've got a number in Queensland, I think it's 9 or 10, and these are geographic areas. We're next to one here, that they're going to really build a heap of industrial scale solar, wind and battery energy storage systems and a heap of transmission to link it all together. And don't just think, oh, geez, I'm lucky I live out west or I live on the coast, we're not going to have any renewables here. Well, guess what? In the fine print, they say they can build renewables anywhere and they can increase the size of these renewable energy zones if they need be. Each one of those renewable energy zones there have a generation target. They're just going to be big solar and wind powerhouses. If they don't reach the target, they build more. In New South Wales and Victoria, they're ahead of Queensland. And there is massive impacts down there. In one regional council area, there's 183 major industrial solar and wind projects going on at any one time. So you can see the impacts on the roads, on your health services, on your accommodation, your water. There's massive impacts on local communities. This is Queensland's renewable energies. We've got 3 regions. We've got renewable energy regions. So we've got the northern and far north, the central and southern. So we're in the southern here, just on the edge. Biggern's just into the central region. And these are all where those red dots are the renewable energy zones. And that's where you see a heap of development out at Waluga at the moment. And over here at Forest Wind. Okay, and that's just going to grow. There's going to be more solar and wind because we're in those renewable energy zones. Anywhere within those regions, they'll be able to build them, but these are the key areas to start with. The Calliope one out the back, there's Calliope there. That's the one they're going to, I guess, declare first, because this week the government signed off on the regional transformation and jobs bill, the new energy bill. You see De Brenny poking his chest out there, what a great thing it was. Even the LNP Crisafulli and all them voted for it. And what that does, that they can declare them. This Act allows them to declare a renewable energy zone. So like the Waluga one, like the Tarong one where I am. And what that does, that gives them more executive powers to streamline renewable energy projects, to make them quicker. Because remember, we've got to do this, we're going to boil to death in 5 years, 10 years. This is why they're doing it, to fast track it. And they'll say there'll be, I think De Brenny said, there's going to be 100,000 jobs. It's going to be great for regions. Suck it up. It's going to be great for agriculture. Let me tell you, there's not many jobs that come out of it. And a lot of these are jobs, they're actually importing labour from overseas. And a lot of the solar farms are put up with backpacker labour. How many jobs are going to come out of that for people? This is a map you can get off the net. I can give you the link for it. And this is just where it's got the, remember I said they've got a target, a generation target. There's all the renewable energy zones at the moment. And that's when they're going, the different phases in development. All that information is there. This is all the framework that's coming out. This is in Victoria, where you can't get this map off the net anymore, but the department down there is a heap of letters. Don't know what it means, Department of Environment, Land, Water, whatever. And they produce, this is a map of Victoria, and that's all the agricultural land in Victoria. So they were saying in order to meet their targets that the state set, they would have to cover 70% of agricultural land in Victoria with industrial scale, wind, solar and battery energy storage systems. People say, Jim, you're a bit of a scaremonger, mate. Well, this is the government maps. This is what is going to happen to regional and rural Australia under 100% renewable policy. This is what they want to do. We have got a federal energy minister, Bowen, God love him, who believes and has said by spearing the country with wind and solar, we're going to get better weather. De Brenny says the same thing. That forest wind, we're not going to have cyclones anymore. It's going to be great. It's going to calm everything down. So this is what we're up against. We all want to have environmental sustainability, but not at the cost of our nation and communities. And when I show you some photos, you can see all how environmental sustainable it is. And that's just a map there. They haven't said anything about, that's just all the ag land in, and when I say ag land, I'm talking grazing and cropping, dry and irrigated as well, and South Australia. So they take that map off, actually. And so I just got this from the Net Zero Australian modelling of variable renewable energy footprint. So this was what they thought on one of their models, and this was from the University of Queensland, the University of Melbourne and the University of Princeton. Came together and did a net zero report for Australia. And there's a reference for you there if you want it. And so this is all the list. So what they're talking about here, is 140,000 square kilometres is going to be covered in industrialised solar, wind, battery energy storage systems and transmission line. Do you know how big 140,000 square kilometres is? It's around 14 million hectares. 35 million acres. And they've only modelled this with a variance, could be more. The Institute of Public Affairs had said, well, no, we think it's more than that. We think it's between 56 million hectares and 181 million hectares of agricultural land that's going to be. Because remember the overbuild, you've got to build so much. And if the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow, guess what? You don't get any power. No matter how big the overbuild is it? If you haven't run out of battery storage, what do you get if there's no wind and solar? You get zero. And we need electricity in a modern society like we need oxygen, don't we? We don't want it up and down. We need it every day at the right time, the right frequency. And at the right price, exactly. And so the other thing that this Net Zero report talks about, and it's bad news for landowners, is because you would have heard about they're trying to look at a trial to inject liquid carbon dioxide into the Great Artesian Basin as part of carbon sequestration. And we're scared that if that goes ahead, there'll be a lot of other companies lining up that have emissions, that want to reduce emissions by injecting so much carbon dioxide in a liquid form into the artesian basin. Now they have big things that are going to catch the carbon dioxide out of the air and store it under the ground. Part of the offset of this too, they talk about in this net zero report, is afforestation, and afforestation is planting heaps of trees. You think, oh, that's a good thing. But it's going to be forced afforestation of Australian farmland, and they're looking at 5.1 million hectares that is going to be planted under trees, all our grazing land, a lot of our dry cropping land. So you just think about that. If I've talked 14 million hectares covering up in solar, wind, battery energy storage systems transmission, plus you add 5.1 million hectares. Because this is what these loonies think, that we've got to grab as much carbon dioxide out of the air through trees, and plus injecting it under the ground. This is what we are looking at to achieve net zero. This is what it means for us. I'm not here to say whether global warming is true or not. I'm just here to say these are the impacts. This is what we need to get through. You think government's in your lives now? It's going to increase dramatically in order to get regulations to achieve what we want and modify our behaviour to get to net zero. Here's a slide my mate took at an engineering conference last year in Gladstone, and this was a presentation. Remember I talked about Gladstone's going to be a major export hub for hydrogen? Yeah. This was a presentation by the CEO of the Gladstone Ports Authority Corporation. Like Powerlink, it's a government-owned corporation, but it looks after our ports. Rockhampton, Bundaberg, Gladstone, Maryborough. And he was there because Twiggy's got a big, they call it an electrolyser. So an electrolyser is a piece of equipment that takes hydrogen and it breaks down water to hydrogen and oxygen. It takes a heap of energy to do that. A massive amount. I think it's 6 in, 5 out. That's what you get with hydrogen. And hydrogen is very unstable. It's got to go down and be kept around 260 degrees below zero. Otherwise it's very unstable. So they're going to export that. But to do that, because it takes so much energy, he was there sprouting how they need 10,000 wind turbines at the back of Gladstone and 2,500 square kilometres of solar farms to produce enough electricity to make hydrogen and send it overseas. And you think, oh, Jim Willmont, you're being a bit of a scaremonger. Well, United Kingdom's just signed up to 18,000 wind turbines to be put in around the country and off the coast by 2030. So these figures are true. Queensland's on the way now up its coastal ranges with the projects. We've got about 110 projects on play at the moment to have 4,000 wind turbines already. 4,000 wind turbines already. And we're only, remember at the step change scenario, triple, double, double. This is what's coming, and they use 45,000 megalitres of water in that as well. This is my mate Stephen Nowakowski developed this for me. You might have heard of Steve. He's been very active in the north part. He's part of rainforest reserves. All this red area here we're seeing is wind turbine developments up and down the coastal ranges, especially, a few out here, because they're going to these coastal ranges, and unfortunately these coastal ranges is where the last of our really high level biodiversity is. Hasn't been cleared for agriculture because of the steepness, and a lot of our I guess marsupials, our fauna has retreated there. Yeah. A lot of it's still owned by landholders, but it's part of those areas where they're never going to clear. You can't get up there. They've kept it there. But this is where all these wind companies are going, and we're letting them do it. So, just bear with me. So this is the area here that we're talking about. So this is just a closed-up section, and you can see these areas here. There's a lot of state land, national parks, but this is just up the coastal range of Queensland, just behind Gladstone. So they're building, all the red is where they're building these wind turbine factories. The yellow is big solar factories. Remember I said the 10,000 wind turbines out the back of Gladstone? Well, this is going to be part of it. This is happening right now. They're clearing land right now. So these are all in that area, where these are all the actual high voltage transmission lines. And you can see there's Clark Creek. So Clark Creek's an interesting development. You know, as a landholder, I can't go under the Reef Act because we're all in a reef area here. Legally, the reef police can come and see my property if I have a bare area that's bigger than the size of a kitchen table. So I've got a regulatory obligation to keep my land to have 50% ground cover by the end of September each year. Fair enough, I should, yeah, to minimise erosion. These guys aren't covered by that legislation. Clark Creek, they have blasted 1.3 million cubes off the top of a mountain range to put nearly 300 metre high turbines to the tip on. But myself, I'd be in jail. Katie would potentially come and bail me out maybe. So as we keep going, Lotus Creek, remember Lotus Creek was on the news, Sky News. They had permission under their environmental impact statement to actually club koalas and any marsupial to death. Remember that? They come up to a tree one day in the bulldozer, the koala goes, nah, not moving, righto. The next day they come, push it over, club the koala to death. They were actually ordered to carry a steel bar with them on their machine to put those animals to sleep. This is what is happening to our environment as well, under the watch of a Labor government and people like Pocott and the Green groups. It's madness. And as I click through, you can see these wind factories being developed close to the high voltage power lines. And you can see proposed ones there in that kind of skin pink colour. And this is what we're seeing, the industrialisation. Yellow is solar. That's the industrialisation of rural Queensland, people. So what's the issues with a 100% renewable approach? Well, the spatial footprints. At a national level, there is roughly 2,000 industrial scale renewable projects on the books now. And remember, I'm talking about the double, triple. You can see how many more that there will be. It's going to destabilise our agricultural production land, isn't it? When you've got massive areas covered in solar and wind, people are getting out. They're going to sit in the pub drinking, going, well, I've got making all this money off this. Or the bloke beside him who can't get insurance, and I'll go into that quickly, or has got to suffer the noise or the property devaluation. A lot of people around Kilkeevan are selling up. I don't know if you've driven the road between here and Kilkeevan. You look at all the for sale signs, bing, 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 bing. They're all getting out. So it's fracturing, dividing up and hollowing out regional communities, because in the communities you have people that have sold or leased and they're under confidentiality agreements. You know, it's good money. A young family in debt might get $40,000 a turbine. But what about his neighbour or his other neighbour? They don't get anything in most cases. But they get the noise, the property devaluation, the increased fire risk. And then, so that divides the communities. That village of Rye Park that you heard me yell about at the Canberra rally I went to, that is a fractured community. They can't even get enough people to have a P&C committee at their local school anymore, or attend their rural fire brigade. It busts us up. It fractures us. It pits it. It's all about money. The environmental impacts. So, you know, with those wind turbines that I showed you, those factories in that map are all up and down the east coast of Queensland, 4,600 kilometres of roads that have got to be pushed up the top of these ranges. And they're not just small little roads, they're up to 85 metres wide because they've got to get 400-tonne cranes up there, these massive trucks up there. It's a massive environmental impact. And the unbalanced regulatory approach, they are not covered by the Nature Conservation Act, these companies. They're not covered by the Vegetation Management Act. They're not covered by the reef regulations. They're covered by a Wind Code 23, which we don't get to know about them. And they're covered by there's a Veg Management Code 16. So they're only code accessible. Who's checking on them? No one is checking on them. They get signed off, ticked off, and boom. And so that's what a lot of landholders are peeved about. And then there's the cumulative impacts. You get all these things put close together. What about all the birds and the bats? We know they're bird chompers and bat chompers. And what if there's a fire in one, it spreads to the other, and then spreads to the other, and then spreads to the other? What about everyone moving in out of an area and they're going to another area but can't go to another area because that's got another wind farm on it or another big solar farm? Where are we all going to go? To the coast. Because all of our regional areas will be plastered in this crap. So they haven't thought about the cumulative effects. In that net zero report, and I digress, they actually say it needs to be rolled out quickly and we need to get social licence quickly before they realise the impacts. They say that in the report. They are treating rural and regional people with contempt. And our politicians that are supposed to be standing up and representing us are selling us out. They say it's going to be good for us, that it's going to be jobs, it's going to be cheaper power. It's going to be none of those things. Energy security is national security. Guess where a lot of this stuff is made? It is made in China with coal, bought from us and a lot of other places around the world. China and India together, they're about 5.6 billion tonnes of coal they use. It increased from 2022 to 2023, 600 million tonnes. That 600 million tonnes increase represents all the coal that the USA uses in 1 year. Farm insurance. So as a cocky, I usually get 20 million liability for your farm insurance, yeah? Because you live next to another farm. In case I light a fire, it goes out of control. I have been known to use the red steer a little bit. But what happens if you live next to a big wind or solar factory that's worth $500 million, $1 billion? You might live 10 k's away, light a fire, it burns out through all the properties and burns 50,000 solar panels. Guess where they're going to come? They're going to go, oh, Willmont, you just bloody cost us $100 billion. Give me a look at your insurance. Oh, it's only 20 million. They'll take my farm. Landholders down south that are surrounded by this crap have real concerns. Here's a family here saying they can't get insurance. Well, $50 million in insurance costs $30,000. $100 million, if you can get it, costs $50,000 a year. But beyond that, you can't get insurance. You ask the state government people down in New South Wales and Victoria, well, it's a commercial thing you've got to work out with your broker. Can you see the impacts that they haven't thought about as they roll this stuff out? We will have these impacts here. And that's another family that lives next door to a big solar farm worried about insurance. These are these lithium containers. Remember these big battery packs, these big energy storage systems? We're not just talking just a couple of big 40-foot containers. There's one down, we went to a meeting down at Rosewood a couple of months ago. They're talking about, and they always cite them near solar and wind factories, they're talking about 500 40-foot containers linked together. Sitting on the bare ground. But I asked at a meeting in Ellesmere, which is just west of Nanango, and there's 160 of them. I said, what fire suppression? He goes, well, if one, Jim, you know, it's good because if one burns, the other don't burn. They can only burn one at a time. I said, what happens? He said, we've just got to let them burn. So all that toxic smoke, because they do burn, one in Boulder Combe burned, this one in South Australia burns, where's that going to blow? That's going to blow over rural and regional areas. It's going to blow over urban areas. And you know, China, these are all made in China. You imagine if there's a major geopolitical issue coming up, whether, you know, Taiwan's invaded. What happens if China just goes, well, we'll just click these off? Click. What's going to happen to our power? Oh, geez, we didn't realise China owns all our power system, all the solar farms. We've got no power for our industry or our hospitals. Oh, but you know, right, they're a communist country. They won't do that to us. They're our friends. We should be sidling up to China more. Yeah, right. Picture of Greece. This is what 100% renewables looks like. Do you want our regions to look like this in Australia? I say no. This is why they can't get social licence from us. We don't want our friggin' regions to turn into this. Things that only last 15 to 20 years and you've got to throw them out. Did Brenny say, oh, we're going to have a big Remanufacturing. They can only remanufacture 10% of a solar panel. Guess where the rest of it goes? Oh, we're going to start building solar panels ourselves in an coal-fired power station site. And there's China pumping them out for about $5 each, where we could probably sell them for 50. Guess where the companies are going to buy them from? It's like burning $1 billion, Albanese. Wind turbines, 1 every 300 catches fire. They also actually lose a blade. No, every now and then. And what happens if, these towers here, what are they going to be, 200 metres, 220 metres, something like that, Des? Yep, and then, nearly 300 metres at the tip of the blade. It's not like you can just monkey up there on the back of a rural fire brigade reel and start spraying. You've got to let these suckers burn. That's right. Imagine in a high fire hazard situation where one catches fire and poof, and catches the next one and catches the next one, and they're all up in really rugged areas. This is in South Australia. I just want to show you now how they reckon this is environmentally sound and really green. These are the tracks that they're blowing up to put wind turbines on in these coastal ranges. But it's all clean and green. It's good for the environment. That's why we're doing it, isn't it? Silly. That's the Emerald wind factory. That's the one that's running about 26% capacity factor. That's one of the blades that went to the Emerald wind farm. So that's factory. That's 56 metres. The blades here, Des, how big are they? 50. Well, these ones, now they're making them, 100 metres. 100 metre blades, nearly twice the size of that. What's that going to do to our roads trying to get here? South Burnett Council's already having huge issues with their roads with all the Cooper Gap wind farm that was built. That's right. Imagine and they're all covered with this resin called bisphenol A. You might have heard about it. And banned in a lot of countries. And because of the, atmospheric conditions in Australia, we get a lot of dust. A lot of that wears on the leading edge, goes into our water tables. It's carcinogenic. 2 grams to, I think, 10 million litres of water. What's that going to do to our country? It's going to poison us. It's too late going, oh, geez, we didn't realise this. Geez, what are we going to do? More issues. Look at that riparian vegetation they're knocking down. Never been cleared, but it is now. Here's another. This is all supposed to be green and saving biodiversity. It looks like it's saving biodiversity to you. Look at the big tracks they're pulling up. There is no consideration for erosion control there. You can see the turbines in the back. Look at the beautiful forest that's getting pushed off there. And guess what? These turbines emit infrasound. And infrasound is the movement of massive big objects. Creates a sound wave that you can't hear. Yeah. We can't hear below about 16 megahertz below. And so when those big blades pass that marsh, you imagine a 100 metre blade going woof, past that marsh, boom, that big mast, it boom. And it's like when you wind down your window on a car, yeah? And you're going past all those delineator plates. Well, this is a massive one of them. And what they're saying now is like a lot of the animal kingdom communicates in low megahertz infrasound, yeah? And so they're saying koalas can be affected up to 10 Ks. So we're putting all these things up the top of our ranges where there's really high biodiversity, where they've all escaped to. And now we're going to clear it and put these things there. And koalas use infrasound to actually mate and call to each other. They're going to be out of there, mate. There's studies about infrasound, how it affects human beings overseas, how it affects our domestic animals. But all that is wiped over with the industry. The wind industry only measures decibels, what you can hear. And they do make noise, these things as well. You can hear them, but it's the infrasound. They call it blade pass harmonics, where that big sweep comes through past that and you get that woof. that big sound wave coming. It can travel up to 10 or 15 kilometres just because you think 3 k's. Or in Queensland, it's 1.5 k's from the nearest residence. In New South Wales, it's 2 k's. In Victoria, it's 1 kilometre. And guess what? When that infrasound comes up to a residence, it actually intensifies it. And it goes down a lot of the valleys and it actually kind of, I guess, musters it in. If you live 3 k's away, you are still going to get affected. It affects some people more than others. And they should be saying to us and proving to us that it's safe before we start building thousands and thousands of them in our community. This is the fight. This is what drives Katie and I and the thousands of other people in Australia to fight against this stuff. That's one of the bases that they are putting down. Now, I just want you to watch this and the blade flicker. You might have seen a few things on, but this is the Caban wind factory, 70 k's southwest of Cairns. You just watch the blade flicker here. So you imagine how much far this would go. Boompa. There it goes. Look at the size of these things. Look at the blasting that's gone into those ridge lines. 200 metres high at the hub and 100 metre blades. Each of those 3 blades, when they're turning, covers the area of 5 football fields. You are talking massive areas. This is heavy industrialisation of our landscape and our rural areas. But you talk to the politicians, oh mate, we've got to do this. It's clean, it's green. It's going to provide electricity for us. It varies. What they're finding in Australia, it should be 25 years, but what they're seeing now in Victoria and that they're only, a lot of the gearboxes, having a lot of gearbox issues because you can see the smaller ones have less stress. These are huge and they're getting bigger and bigger. And a lot of the gearboxes only lasting 5 years. A lot of the bearings burr out because you can imagine the load on the bearings. And it's big money to replace bearings. No. They're all full of oil. I don't know how much oil. I think it's around 1,000 litres of oil each one. A lot of hydraulic oil. Depends. Blade replacement, they won't really say. It could last, it depends on environmental conditions, but they've been replacing blades after 5 years, after 10 years. The offshore ones are worse because their impact, you can imagine all the salt, the air out there. Off the coast of Scotland, 5 years, and they've had to pull the whole generators out of those wind factories, the coastal offshore wind ones. I don't know. Hard to find. I'd like to find out the maintenance schedule. It's hard to get it out of them. Yep. Yep, definitely. So there's another one of those bases. So when one of the big turbines, 1,000 cubes of concrete goes into it. And you know how much, if you're talking emissions, if you believe in climate change, look how much is emissions in concrete. You're talking about the use of concrete in Barumba. They've estimated 1.6 million cubes is going to go into the tunnels at Barumba. But you know it's all about lowering emissions, yeah? There's another big base that's further south. Look at the size of the damn thing, because you can imagine the stress. And when they come to the end of life, they leave the base there. You know, so that's, you know, you can't even put a stock trough on it because it's domed. Anyway. So this is what we're looking at. This is Caban again. This is the new invasive species of our coastline and our rural areas, these wind turbines. And this is what you're going to see off the coast, and you will nearly see this here if you're up a little bit higher. You're going to see this, because they've all got to have red lights on for aeronautical. So remember, they flicker because you've got the big blade pass coming past the lights. Boom. You will be able to go off the coast of Gympie all the way to Cairns and see red lights like this. Is that what we want for Australia? Flicking, flicking, flicking. Exactly. Or animals as well. It is visual pollution. Look at the beautiful Fraser Island, Cooloola National Park, but then we go and put this industrialisation right next to it. Does that make sense to you? How's that going to affect our tourism, where people go, oh yeah, it's beautiful, just look at those red lights flickering. What's going on there? Humpback whales. A lot of the animals, not only the infrasound, but the lights affect them. And it's not only wind turbines. Anything above 61 metres high has got to have a red light on it. So these big transmission towers can be up to 85, 95 metres high. They are all going to have red lights on them. But apparently we've got to take this because it's clean, green and doing our bit for climate change in the rural areas. Well, they'll see, like, that's right, but it'll make them feel good. So this is about all the animals. So who's speaking in? I know Katie's really hammered this for all the animals up the top of these ranges or in the path of these transmission lines. What's going to happen to them? Who's speaking out for them? The green groups aren't. POCOT's not. Labor's not. Guess who are? Rural communities that we're branded as environmental vandals. The only green groups is groups like Stephen Nowakowski's Rainforest Reserves Australia. Follow them. It's a great group. He loved wind turbines, but now he said they're the biggest environmental disaster I have ever seen. The green groups say, and I'll go off on this a little bit, the green groups say, because we've got to rush. Of course there's going to be impacts, but we've got to get this done quickly because we're going to boil to death. Now remember this when I'll show you some graphs near the end of my presentation. It's not far away. So what are the solutions? What we're saying to the politicians, just woo up. Let's just pause and plan this out properly. Instead of 100% renewables, let's just look at the optimal amount. You might have rural areas that might have their own renewable grid to power that small town somewhere. Let's just look at the alternatives. Yeah, like Windora. We need to continue to push for a federal Senate inquiry, but you know what? Labor and the Greens they're going to run to the next election pushing that out because they don't want this information to come out. Because you don't hear about this type of information, do you? It's all clean, green, 100,000 jobs, it's going to be money. We'll get a new footpath in Mergen, maybe a nice undercover horse arena. Build momentum because this year, October, is our state election. Ask your state member here, what's his name, Perrott, what's his position on this? I know what his party's position is on it because this week they just sided with Labor to vote through the Clean Economy Job Act and the Energy Act that's going to set up renewable energy zones. So why don't you go and ask Tony, what's your position, mate? What's your party's position? And if you don't like what he's got to say, don't vote for him. So we should be looking at the optimal amount of renewables. There might have to be some, but not 100%. This is my mate Steve Wilson. He's a professor of energy at University of Queensland. So let me explain this. Thanks Steve for doing this map. So these are all the different energy generation sources. You've got brown coal, black coal, gas and steam-driven, gas-driven hydro energy, our pumped hydros, gas turbine, liquid fuel, liquid turbine, wind and solar. So he's saying we'll never get to a triple, double. We'll get to about 40% renewables and we won't be able to keep up the replacement because they don't last. While we're building the new ones, we'll be replacing the old ones. He said we'll never get there with the amount of material labour. And he said as we closed down, like a couple of years ago, we closed down Liddell. We actually blew it up. We blew up one of our power stations. Germany, at least for Christ's sake, they're mothballing them in case they want to use them again. Admittedly, a lot of our coal-fired power stations in New South Wales and Victoria are ageing. Queensland, we've still got some modern power stations, or what they call high-efficient, low-emission turbines and boilers, and they will last for 15, 20 years with maintenance now. What he's saying, this is the gap that's going to be coming at us when we're going to start to fall off the energy grid. When they start to close down, and they are, coal-fired power station, where the bulk of our base is coming from, look here, brown coal, black coal, there's going to be a gap appearing because our base load from hydro, pumped hydro, gas, solar and wind isn't going to be enough to replace this base. We are going to be in energy poverty. We will have blackouts. The ISP, the Integrated System Plan, said the bulk of the power stations, coal power stations, will be closed by 2038. So where's our power going to come from? Can you see what we're heading for? Do they show you this? This is from a professor of energy at UQ. He's saying, what are you doing? And it's not just him. There is tens and tens of professors around the world that saying you just can't do it on 100% renewables. You need base load power. So what he's saying, and even with nuclear, you see Bowen and that laughing at nuclear, and nuclear will take some time, but there's a heap of countries doing it because it provides base load. You don't need 10,000 kilometres of new transmission lines. It has a very small footprint. But he's saying in the meantime, just retrofit more efficient turbines and boilers in those southern coal-fired power stations to give us a 15, 20-year gap to get to the right nuclear mix. It makes sense, doesn't it? But what you'll hear from the Greens and the opposition is, oh no, we can't. We've got to rush this through. This is flat out. China's so busy making it all for us on our coal. These are the countries investigating in nuclear for baseload power. Some have already got there. The United Arab Emirates have built 3 in the last 10 years. South Africa's going nuclear. Japan, India, China, there's 12 nuclear power stations per year. There's 50 countries going nuclear. Now, I used to be scared of nuclear. I'd grown up with bloody Fukushima, that thing, like I'm scared of it. But we need to investigate it because I'm more scared of industrial renewables and what it's going to do. I'm more scared of not having enough power and being in poverty. I'm scared that our kids, our next generation, are not going to have enough power. So we need to at least investigate. We can't even research. We can't even research because of the state and federal prohibitions on research. You can't even research it. But we're going to have nuclear-powered submarines, apparently. We've got the biggest nuclear and thorium reserves in the world in Australia. So we need to investigate nuclear and other options. So it does away with new transition lines and the increases enormous power generation in a tiny footprint. Before I close now, I argue with Labor and Greens people all the time, with Pocot's fella, the galling, we're so galling. They all say Australia must rapidly transition to renewable energy. We've got to do this quick. We can't wait to study different things, Jim, or go to clean coal technology and then jump to nuclear. A rapid transition to renewable energy will bring more benign weather conditions. This is what they believe. Putting all these wind turbines up and so we're going to have better weather here. This is going to help us on a worldwide weather scale. You know, we are being misled. We are being misled. This is a graph. Annual CO2 emissions. Look at China. To America, the next one down. And guess one's rising here too, with 1.2 billion people. India. Remember, Australia is 1% of emissions, and they're telling us that we should rush it. It's going to produce more benign energy. You reckon when China's energy emissions up like this, and you go, well, Jim, they are going to renewables too. This is China's energy mix at the moment. Oil, coal, gas. This is renewables up the top. So do you think China punches out as much emissions as Australia does every 16 days? Boom, 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 boom. And a lot of that's, producing the renewable parts that we're going to use here to make us feel, oh, we're green and we're going to net zero. Can you see the hypocrisy of this? Can you see whatever we do here isn't going to affect the world climate when you've got China punching out so much? Not just China. That's India. That's the States. And the States, when they've changed and use a lot of natural gas, because natural gas drops it by about 30% emissions, so it's actually quite good. It still produces some emissions, but it does. And there's their nuclear, wind and solar there, but still primarily gas, coal and oil. But it's only very steady increase, if at all. Here's an interesting map before I close. It's called, who's heard of the Belt and Road Initiative from China? Yeah? So they've signed up 154 countries, 148 to 154, and it's all about policy coordination, financial assimilation, trade, technology, and people, intellects, swapping. And so China, all those coloured areas, is the 154 countries China's signed up for. And it's all these lower income, poor countries that China is going to help lift out of poverty. You think it's a great idea? Yeah. But when they do that, they're going to increase emissions because it's all about energy consumption, yeah? It's all going to be coal. It's all going to be fossil fuels. So you're going to have all these other poorer countries coming online and increasing their emissions. Yeah, true. That's right, exactly. So that's all I've got to say, and thank you very much. I'll close, but if there's any questions, yeah, I'll take them. PRA has just put out a survey, and you can go to their Facebook site or website, and there's a link there. It's a survey of what rural and regional communities think of the current rollout of renewables and how it's going to affect them. And I encourage you, we're up to about 700 people at the moment, but the more people that fill out that survey, it only takes about 3 or 4 minutes, fill it out and share it. Because guess what? The federal government's come out with their own survey through CSIRO, and it says we all love renewables. Rural people are quite happy with it. It's the property rights. You go to the property rights Facebook page and it's pinned up the top. Or on our website, it's there as well. Well, it's actually, Jan's put it up on Wide Bay Residents Against Wind Farms. Kilkeevan's put it up, and I know Bigginon's put it up as well. So, but anyway, that's it. So thanks for your time. And I'd like to especially thank Warren McEwen, who's our Division 6 councillor, for Gympie Regional Council to come along. He's been to a lot of meetings, so put your hand together for Warren. Thanks, mate. He's on the same page as us. Anyway, any questions at all? Yep.
Thanks, Jim, for your talk. In Europe and the UK, as you mentioned, they've had renewable wind turbines at least for 20, 25 years, and obviously they've been destroyed over that period of time over, storms and whatever. Is there anything that we can learn from those countries that we can take to the federal government and say, look, they're opposing it now because it just doesn't work in the long term, that we can take and present to them?
That's right. It's a good question, and there is a lot of things that we can learn from that renewables. Like, look at Germany. Look at Sweden is actually moving away from renewables. They've got such good hydro resources and that too. The government has just got the blinkers on with this. You present them with data, they just don't take any notice of the data. There's heaps of data there, like there's a lot of people researching stuff, and I say to you, research more. Well, we don't know it all, and we learn stuff every day from these different groups that put information in. I wish we could present them. That's why we need a federal inquiry to say, well, this is what's happening, but that's why they don't want it, unfortunately.
When we do the survey, what do you intend doing with the information and the collation?
Okay, we will use it to advocate that, whatever comes out of it, for rural and regional people. If the survey says that we're against renewables or there's certain impacts, we're getting bullied into accepting it. A lot of people are getting bullied by these, I call them GRESA, Renewable Energy Company representatives, or do we think government has listened to the issues that we present them with? Have they acted on it? Those questions like that. Is it affecting the way you relate to people, like in small communities? Is it dividing communities? Do you think potentially it could put your power prices up? Do you think, is there any other better ways to consult? That type of stuff. So we're going to break it down and give you the summary data back for yourselves and your own community as well, but also leave a government and say, hey, look, we've done our survey and this is what people are saying in rural and regional Australia.
Tell everybody about the Reckless Renewables photo competition.
So there's a Reckless Renewables photo competition because Katie and I are part of this National Rational Energy Network, which is linked to another 160 groups just like this one. And you go to their webpage, it's called NREN, National Rational Energy Network. You punch that into Facebook It'll come up and there's a photo competition of the most lousiest renewable photo that you can take that's impacting. Just go out to the solar factory out to Aluga and start snapping away, and there's $1,000 that you can win. Any other questions before we close? No? Well, thank you.